Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, say that 3 times fast, was a German philosopher born in 1770. He lived through the French Revolution and the rise of Napoleon, so it's no surprise that he dedicated his life to trying to make sense of the chaos happening around him. A funny story about Hegel is that he once attended a dinner party at Goethe's house, and when he arrived, everybody was probably like, "Hegel, hey!" Sorry. After he left, Goethe's daughter-in-law said, "How very strange he is. I can't make out whether he's brilliant or crazy. He didn't seem to me to be a very clear thinker." But now, and good news everybody, we've been tasked with making sense of Hegel's notoriously dense thoughts. So let's dive straight into it and see whether Hegel was in fact brilliant or just crazy. What is a dialectic? Now picture this, you're sat in your philosophy seminar and within the first 10 minutes there's always going to be that one kid that says, well actually it's a dialectic. And now you're sat there reconsidering all of your life choices because what is a dialectic? It's a canon event, but now we're going to switch the narrative and we're going to be those kids who know what a dialectic is. A dialectic is when an idea meets an opposing idea and the two ideas clash, creating a third new idea. So every idea, which is the thesis, has an opposing idea, which is the antithesis. When the thesis and antithesis clash, we get a synthesis. The synthesis is a new higher resolution, which typically is combining elements from both the thesis and the antithesis. But let's look at a real-world example of a dialectic to help understand that. Take the example of the Industrial Revolution. So a thesis for the Industrial Revolution may be that the revolution is good because it brings about progress like new technology. And then an antithesis might arise that says, well, the Industrial Revolution isn't good because it's bringing about pollution and exploitation. So now these two opposing ideas about the Industrial Revolution have clashed, and what happens next? Well, we'll get our synthesis, which might say, well, we can still keep factories open, but we need to introduce labor laws to protect the workers there, we need to regulate capitalism, and we need to have some environmental movements to try and mitigate the harms of pollution. So to quickly sum up dialectics, when two opposing ideas clash, one side doesn't just win, but both sides mesh together and create this new idea, which is the synthesis. And Hegel says our world is a collection of these syntheses. Constantly ideas are clashing, and so our world and society is developing through these syntheses. When we look at the world around us and see it as a bit chaotic, Hegel is saying, well, it's not really chaos. It's a product of clashing ideas and constant resolutions, and this is a process that will never stop.
This is the essence of the dialectic.
Let's talk about the master-slave dialectic, which is Hegel's most famous example of a dialectic. Many great thinkers have built upon the master-slave dialectic in their own philosophies, like Beauvoir and Marx. To quickly clarify, when we hear the word master and slave, we usually think of it in the connotation of literally enslaved people. But to be clear, Hegel does not mean it solely in this way. The master-slave dialectic is about power dynamics in any relationship, where slave stands for any dominated or oppressed person in a relationship. This is a key example of dialectics and how it can be applied to human relationships. So for the master-slave dialectic, imagine two people confront each other. One becomes the master and one will become the slave. The thesis is that the master dominates the slave and becomes dependent on the slave. The antithesis is that the slave works hard, realizes their importance, and gains some inner strength. And when this happens, we have a clash in this relationship.
This is the end for you, my master.
So what's the synthesis of a master-slave dialectic? Well, the slave will eventually assert their freedom, and this might come across in a revolution, resistance, or social change. The master will lose their absolute control and must recognize the slave as their own person. This leads to a more equal relationship or a transformed social dynamic. So let's look at a real-world example of the master-slave dialectic, and this is how Simone de Beauvoir adopted the dialectic in her own philosophy. So she used the master-slave dialectic to explain the power relationship between men and women. So for her, the thesis was that men dominate women. In society, they're seen as the master figure.
Remember, he is the master of the house, and as such will always exercise his will with fairness and truthfulness. You have no right to question him.
And her antithesis was that women become conscious of their oppression. So what happens in that synthesis? We get the rise of feminist movements, gender roles shift, and women gain rights. But in this dialectic between man and woman, what's important to note is that in the synthesis, it's not just women who are gaining from this synthesis. They're not the side that's winning, because the men are also gaining. They're going to be freed from some toxic roles themselves. For example, they will no longer be required to be the primary bread earner in the family. This master-slave dialectic took off because it showed how those who are seen as powerless in society can actually transform the future after going through struggle and gaining self-awareness. Going back a little bit, Hegel thinks that our world is a collection of these syntheses. Let's zoom out and see the whole world how Hegel saw it and how he made sense of the chaos. Hegel believed that our reality, so history, culture, politics, is the unfolding of our collective human spirit, or what he called the Geist. So for Hegel, when we look at history, no action, war, or decision was random. None of it was just pure chaos. From the Peloponnesian War to Vietnam, our history is the story of humans slowly realizing their own freedom, even if no one could see it clearly at the time. And we can see this spirit, our collective self-developing, in the means of art, music, philosophy. The point here is, stay hopeful in our world, because global events will often feel overwhelming and nonsensical. But Hegel is pointing out that while it may look messy to us right now, there is a purpose unfolding, and we're constantly developing and realizing our freedom.
Hope is like the sun. If you only believe in it when you can see it,
you'll never make it through the night.
So Hegel is basically saying, just chill, dude. Everything is fine. When you read the news, just know that there's a greater purpose. Our freedoms are slowly developing. Don't worry. Don't worry about it. And there is some sense in this idea. For example, once societies started embracing the idea that humans actually have rights, and yeah, that process was really messy and took a while to get to, that belief pretty quickly started reshaping all political systems. That's why we saw this burst of revolution. Governments were falling, revolutions happened, laws were changing, and in that moment, it probably wasn't so nice to live through that chaos, but there was a purpose there, and a great purpose at that. We were gaining our freedom. For example, World War II was awful, but it was also crucial for developing international law and creating organizations for peacekeeping like the United Nations. For Hegel, fights and conflicts aren't indicating the end of the story. It's not the end of the road for humanity, but rather they're a crucial step in continuing to develop our story. That's a really brief and quick synopsis of Hegel, just to familiarize you with his main ideas and thoughts. Let's go a little bit into Hegel's legacy, which will lead us into next week's video on Marx. Politically speaking, Hegel thought that a constitutional monarchy with a rule of law was the best bet for freedom in society at his time, where a constitutional monarchy will keep things stable but allow some space for freedom, and the rule of law exists to guarantee individual rights. Then Marx came along and was like, no Hegel, I have another idea. And just like that, boom, new thesis, dialectic continues. So find out in next week's video what Marx's ideal political system would look like and how he countered Hegel's idea of dialectics.